Donnie Darko is a film that ends with a teenage boy laughing in his bed seconds before a jet engine crushes him to death. When the universe resets, everyone else wakes up safe. His parents, his sister, his girlfriend, they don't mourn him, they simply go on. Donnie was the only one who had to know what was happening. Everyone else gets to forget. His laugh is framed as acceptance, a noble sacrifice. The moment he understands his purpose and chooses meaning over survival. And that should feel familiar to us, because we do this all the time, telling people that their suffering has meaning, that everything happens for a reason, and the acceptance of that suffering is wisdom. The film itself asks a lot of questions, but here's one it doesn't ask. Was Donnie's death a necessary sacrifice, or was he purposely not given enough knowledge in order to be able to make a different choice? That question, that's Donnie Darko. Donnie Darko is a story about a troubled teenager living in suburban Virginia in late 1988. He has intrusive thoughts he can't fully explain. He sleepwalks, is in therapy, and is on medication. His family treats all of this as a kind of exhausted normalcy, learning to live around him. On the night of October 2nd, Donnie sleepwalks out of his bedroom and wanders onto the street. He's confronted by a figure in a monstrous rabbit costume. It calls itself Frank, and it tells him the world will end in 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds. While he's gone, a jet engine inexplicably falls from the sky and crashes through his bedroom ceiling. He survives only because he wasn't there. No one can figure out where the engine came from. It doesn't belong to any known aircraft. It's an impossible object that appears without origin. From that moment forward, Donnie begins experiencing distortions in reality. Time stops behaving consistently. He starts seeing liquid translucent paths extended from people's chests. Paths that show where they're about to move before they move. He begins following them. Over the next 28 days, Donnie performs a series of actions. He falls for a girl named Gretchen Ross. He floods his school. He burns down the house of a motivational speaker named Jim Cunningham, exposing him as a predator. These actions come to align with what the countdown is moving toward. Eventually, an explanation arrives. Donnie gets a copy of a book called A Philosophy of Time Travel, written by Roberta Sparrow, an old woman known locally as Grandma Death. And according to the book, sometimes reality can fracture. A tangent universe branches off from our primary universe. It's temporary but unstable, and is destined to collapse unless corrected. When it forms, an object that doesn't belong appears, which the book calls an artifact. A living receiver is chosen, and the living receiver must return that artifact to the primary universe before the tangent universe collapses and destroys everything in its wake. The jet engine is the artifact. Donnie is the receiver. The end of the countdown marks the exact moment the tangent universe collapses. This is the only framework Donnie receives. The book provides structure. Frank provides instructions. And Donnie never considers or asks what happens if he refuses. The film never shows us what could occur if the tangent universe isn't corrected. It only shows us what happens when Donnie believes it must be. On the final night before the deadline, the chain finally snaps. Gretchen is killed in a sudden car accident, the last consequence in a sequence Donnie has been following without fully understanding. In the chaos, Donnie shoots Frank, who is now revealed to be a real teenager, wearing the rabbit costume, killing him in the tangent universe. The collapse begins. Donnie sends the jet engine from a plane that his mother and sister are on back through time. Back to October 2nd, back to the primary universe, back to the exact moment it originally appeared. Only this time, Donnie doesn't leave his bed. Instead, the jet engine crashes through his ceiling and he is killed instantly. The tangent universe collapses, reality resets. Everyone wakes up on October 2nd in the primary universe. Donnie's mother and sister get off the plane safely. Gretchen never dies. Frank never becomes a killer. The world continues. Donnie dies laughing. The reset doesn't prove Donnie was right. It only proves the timeline continued. There's no confirmation that the catastrophe would have still occurred. No counterfactual. Just a world that moved forward and a boy who didn't. That's the story the film tells. And for decades, audiences have treated it like a puzzle about fate and sacrifice. It feels like Donnie figured something out. Like he saw the design of the universe and made a choice that mattered. The film isn't asking to be solved, it's asking to be accepted. Because underneath the complex time travel mechanics, there's a much simpler story being told. Not about physics, but about pressure. Donnie doesn't figure out how to save the world so much as he's taught that his life is the problem and that his death is the only solution. And the most powerful tool used to teach him that lesson isn't violence or threat, it's time. 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds. That's the countdown Frank gives Donnie. And from that moment forward, every conversation, every vision, every strange event happens inside that shrinking window. The film presents this as cosmic inevitability, a clock built into the fabric of reality. The countdown is meant to not give Donnie time to figure things out. It removes time as a resource. The countdown doesn't expand possibilities, it collapses them. When Donnie first meets Frank, he has options. He could choose to ignore him, he could tell his parents, he could refuse to engage altogether. But by October 15th, he's flooded the school, burned down a house, and started following the liquid spears. He's choosing these actions because doing nothing feels more dangerous than doing something. By October 25th, Gretchen is dead, Frank has been shot, there's only one direction left to move. At no point does Donnie weigh his options. Instead, every scene pushes him forward. The visions get stronger, and the book, The Philosophy of Time Travel, gives him a framework that gives him structure and meaning. The countdown has removed the option to where he lives. So by the time Donnie reaches the end, his choice isn't between life and death, it's between dying with purpose or dying without it. The 28 days are a training period, and what Donnie is being trained to do is to accept his fate. Donnie sees a therapist named Dr. Thurman. She's calm, professional. She creates a safe space for him to talk about the visions, the sleepwalking, and the voice of Frank. And in every session, she does something very specific. She reframes his resistance as immaturity. When Donnie questions authority, for example calling his gym teacher a bitch, or challenges the fear versus love ideology, Dr. Thurman doesn't validate his instincts. She guides him back towards acceptance, towards the idea that his anger is a symptom, not a response. Therapy in Donnie Darko isn't presented as harmful. It's presented as genuine care, and that's what makes it so effective. At school, Jim Cunningham preaches a simple philosophy. Every human action can be placed on a spectrum. Fear on one end, love on the other. Donnie raises his hand and asks, what if you could go back in time and take all those hours of pain and darkness and replace them with something better? It's a challenge. Donnie is asking if suffering can be undone. Jim Cunningham doesn't engage. He calls Donnie's question a little too complex for the group. Turns out, what Cunningham's philosophy actually teaches isn't love versus fear, it's compliance versus questioning. Even Donnie's parents operate within this same framework. When he talks about Frank, or time travel, or the end of the world, they treat it as part of his condition. That passively teaches Donnie that the only person who can save the world is himself. There's a moment in therapy where Donnie tells Dr. Thurman about his fear of dying alone. She asks him to sit with it, to find meaning in it. Fear, she tells him, is a survival mechanism. And she's right. But what she doesn't say is that fear can also be a training mechanism, a way of teaching someone that their suffering has reason. By the time Donnie reaches the end of the 28 days, he's no longer afraid of dying alone, and his lack of fear isn't framed as defeat, it's framed as enlightenment. When Gretchen dies, Donnie doesn't grieve in a way that makes him want to stop. He grieves in a way that makes him understand. Her death is proof. Proof that everything he's believed up to this point is true. The tangent universe is in fact collapsing. The philosophy of time travel gives him a vocabulary for why this matters. The living receiver, the manipulated death, the artifact. Every term makes his suffering sound cosmically significant instead of personally unbearable. Once suffering has a name, once it has a role in a larger story, it stops being something you fight and becomes something you fulfill. Grandma Death tells Donnie, every living creature on Earth dies alone. It's presented as wisdom, but it doesn't comfort him. It escalates his isolation. It tells him that his fear was never irrational, but rather prophetic. He was always meant to die alone. The only question was whether he would die understanding why. Donnie isn't convinced to die through threats. He's convinced through meaning, through the slow accumulation of ideas that reframe his death as necessary and the only way to protect the people he loves. And meaning is so much more effective than force, because force creates resistance, but meaning makes you comply willingly. By the time Donnie lies down in his bed, he's not being coerced, he's being fulfilled. Meaning doesn't erase coercion, it just makes coercion feel like clarity. At least that's what the film wants us to believe. After the jet engine falls and the timeline resets, the film shows us what survives. Donnie's mother wakes up on the plane. Gretchen wakes up and touches her face. Frank touches his eye. Jim Cunningham sits alone, crying for reasons he doesn't understand. Everyone feels something, a faint sadness, but they don't know why. The film doesn't show anyone asking questions. They feel the residue of the tangent universe, but they don't pursue it. They just go on. The reset doesn't just erase Donnie, it erases the possibility of refusal. No one knows that Donnie had a choice. No one is asked to consent to the terms of his sacrifice. They're just handed the result. If Donnie screamed or cried as the engine fell, we, the audience, would recoil. We'd question whether this was really a choice in the first place. But Donnie laughs, and that laugh frames his death as acceptance, as the moment he finally understands what he was always meant to do. Once the film convinces us that Donnie is at peace, it becomes much harder to ask whether peace was the only option he was given. The montage shifts your attention away from what Donnie has lost and towards what everyone else kept. The film not only doesn't answer, it doesn't ask in the first place. Everything happens for a reason. We've all heard that before. It's one of those phrases people use when something terrible happens and there's no explanation for it. The phrase is meant to comfort, but it stops you from asking whether the suffering could have been prevented. It reframes the question from, did this need to happen, to, what is this trying to teach? Once we accept that framework, we stop looking for an exit and start looking for the lesson. This is what Donnie Darko captures. Not time travel mechanics, but the psychology of how suffering becomes sacred, how a countdown becomes a calling, how isolation becomes insight, and how dying young gets reframed as dying meaningfully. We call it purpose or destiny. For decades, Donnie Darko has been celebrated as a story about sacrifice, heroic, tragic, and beautiful. But when you ask whether the 28 days were a countdown or a conditioning period, the response is often defensive, not angry, protective. Because when we interpret suffering as meaningful, we become invested in preserving that meaning. We don't want to believe that Donnie was manipulated, because if he was, his death stops being transcendent and starts being tragic in a way that doesn't provide a resolution. And we need it to resolve. The film gives us a framework where Donnie's death is necessary. Then it gives us a laugh that makes it look peaceful. The montage makes it feel earned. And then we defend it. But we don't ask, what if the film is showing us how belief in cosmic necessity makes actual necessity invisible? The most popular interpretation of Donnie Darko is the interpretation that makes us feel better about the ending. The one that turns coercion into choice. The one that says Donnie wasn't conditioned, he was enlightened. And when we refuse to see horror in a story about a teenager's death, whose comfort are we protecting? Donnie's or our own? Ultimately, Donnie Darko ends where it began. A teenage boy lying in his bed as a jet engine is falling through the sky. Except this time he stays, waits, and laughs. And then he's gone. The film gives us no epilogue beyond the montage. No confirmation that his sacrifice actually worked. We don't know if the tangent universe would have really collapsed. We don't know if Donnie's death was the only solution or just the one the film made visible. The film doesn't give us these answers. It just ends. The silence is the final move, because once Donnie is dead, there's no one left to ask. The reset protects itself. Everyone who survived has no memory of what almost happened. The only person who understood the terms was the one who accepted them. Well, no one's left to tell that story. If you believe Donnie saw the truth and chose sacrifice, then Donnie Darko is a tragedy about the cost of saving the world. If you believe Donnie was conditioned to accept the only option he was ever shown, then Donnie Darko is a horror story about a universe that teaches teenagers to justify their own deaths. Both readings are in the film. Both are supported by what we're shown. The film doesn't choose between them. It just ends with a laugh, a falling engine, and silence. Donnie Darko doesn't need to defend itself. It just needs us to decide whether Donnie's death was beautiful. And if we do, if we walk away feeling moved instead of disturbed, then the film has done exactly what it set out to do. Not by forcing us to accept cosmic necessity, but by making cosmic necessity feel like the only frame that makes the ending bearable. The jet engine falls, Donnie dies, the world continues. And the question of whether he had to, whether there was ever really a choice or just a countdown that made refusal invisible, goes unanswered. Not because the film doesn't know, but because the answer doesn't matter once we've already accepted the ending. If this changed how you see Donnie Darko, please subscribe. We look at films the way they don't want to be seen. Until next time, please take care of yourself.